Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, Vietnam!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel mean, remain, prestige.
Roads? When we're going, we don't need roads.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman. I am the Father.
Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. You join us on this drab November day where it is actually bloody freezing now. For the first time I've noticed frost outside, which is never good. It means that I'll be in big jumpers and leggings and leg warmers as if I'm in Flashdance for the next couple of months. So, yeah.
What an image.
I will do signed photos if people are interested. You know, there will be a premium, but never mind. As you probably already have heard by the laughter, I am joined today by Mary. How the hell are you, Mary? You all right?
I am very well. I've got my first sort of massive jumper on of the season, so OnlyFans and our Patreon will be put to bed whilst I'm in my winter release for the next wee while.
Nice. Yes, it's getting to that time of year gone. Clocks have changed, it's darker earlier, blah, blah, blah. Not great. But to line things up, today we are here to talk about two Alfred Hitchcock films. This is part of our continuing Alfred Hitchcock marathon, which I believe we've only maybe got. We're basically concentrating on the films from the 16-disc Hitchcock series, which came out a long time ago. I think it was re-released on Blu-ray as well in a very nice packaging, which I believe you have, Mary. So we have been working our way through them and bringing in additional titles from outside of that. One of which I don't know if this was part of the 16 disc because I don't have it to hand. Anyway, today we are talking about The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 1956 version, not the earlier version, not the 34 version, and North by Northwest. Arguably right in the sweet spot for the Hitchcock oeuvre, if you like. We'll start with The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Que sera, sera.
You're right, that was a gunshot you heard. That was the signal that brought all the trouble out in the open. It's a scene from our new picture, The Man Who Knew Too Much. As you know, Alfred Hitchcock has an uncanny knack for coming up with the unusual in entertainment. Well, The Man Who Knew Too Much can certainly be put in that category. I play the part of an American doctor. Doris Day is my wife. And the story is about our trip abroad that started out as a holiday and ended up as a nightmare. And to film it, Hitchcock took us thousands of miles away from Hollywood to Marrakesh, which is right in the center of the North African trouble area. And that was just the beginning. From there, we flew to London for backgrounds of a whole strange series of events that ended up that final night in the great concert hall, where the cue for murder was one single crash of the cymbals.
It's a 1956 American mystery thriller with a wee bit of comedy and racism and misogyny in there. It stars James Stewart and Doris Day as an American couple who are touring through North Africa and get embroiled in a situation which is not of their making. It is regarded as being one of the best of the Hitchcock films. It's also regarded, well, yeah, it was at the time. It was regarded very highly. Mary's making a bit of a face here.
Yeah, sorry.
And it's not one of her nice faces either, so we'll just leave that here. So, as I say, it centres around these two as they enter Morocco, heading from Casablanca to Marrakesh, and they happen to meet up with these British people, it's British people who befriend them, and there is also a Frenchman, Louis, that they meet on a bus on the way in, who plays a larger part in the story than you first might think he does. And he actually is pretty much the man who knew too much, which in terms of titles, you would kind of think it would have been James Stewart was the man who knew too much, but that's not the case in this film. So, given a wee sort of a brief overview, rather than going into like hundreds of plot details, because basically I'd be here all day trying to go through the
You have
various
to get your red string out, yeah.
intricacies of the plot and the way that it shifts locations and everything. So we'll just dive right in. Mary, what did you think about this film initially?
Oh, I haven't watched this film for a while, and I won't lie, watching it this time, this was a long 2 hours, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I previously had. I think that there's some issues with some green screen that hasn't aged particularly well. They're obviously shoehorning in a Doris Day song or two. And I don't know, I just feel like this is quite a weak James Stewart performance as well. It's definitely not his best. And I'm surprised to hear that this is sort of regarded as one of the better Hitchcocks, because for me, there's just something about it that just feels a bit humdrum. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's just, having rewatched it now with a fresh set of eyes or whatever and actually making notes, it just probably isn't my favourite.
Yeah, I can get that. The reception of it was generally positive at the time. There were a few critics who, yes, they were saying, obviously, James Stewart maybe a little bit old to be in that sort of situation, as in married with a young son, things like that. But at the time, people, I think, I'm not saying that it was sort of simpler times, but these were regarded as sort of mass entertainment movies at the time, and they always came across really well. It wasn't a flop by any means, but you're right, yes, it is nearly 2 hours long, which it probably doesn't need to be. But on that note, what did you think about the fact that, what did you think of the overall story? Now, we are used to Hitchcock films which are convoluted and they move to all sorts of destinations, and there's various plot contrivances. Do you think this kind of worked in that way? What did you think of the plot of the film, the story?
So I definitely think that I can understand why this would have been seen as a sort of spectacle, because it starts off in Marrakesh, and you've got like this kind of sort of bustling street scenes in the market and the acrobats, which obviously is where we get our Hitch appearance as well. And then it sort of transports us through to England, to this quaint little church setup where obviously the Draytons are plotting their nefarious plan for global domination by installing certain people in positions of power. And then obviously it's sort of the crescendo, pun intended, is at the Royal Albert Hall, where Doris Day flutters her eyelashes and makes her way in to sort of prevent a diplomatic incident. So I do think in terms of scale, it's really impressive, and the fact that, you know, he managed to shoot in some of these locations is quite good. That is my question mark though, because I feel like there is green screen at the start that's really obvious and really bad, but they did shoot in Marrakesh, so I don't quite understand why that's happened. Anyways, in terms of scale, I think it's really impressive and really ambitious. I think the plot is something that wouldn't feel out of place now, about, you know, smaller factions trying to get a certain person into position of power because it works to their advantage. I think actually this is one of these films that might be prime for a remake. So I do think that in terms of size and scale, it's really, really ambitious and really interesting. But I think it's maybe perhaps performance and some of the sort of lesser characters that maybe let it down a wee bit.
Yeah, in terms of the way it was shot, it's a fairly standard model of shooting for films in the 1940s, 1950s. They use back projection for a lot of it, as you highlighted. It wasn't even as sophisticated as green screen.
Yeah.
It was basically something was projected and they would be sitting like
bumbling along in a car.
Exactly. And we will see that again when we talk about our second film today as well. What they would do would B-roll, if you like. There would be a secondary crew would be sent to the locations in order to capture the footage, but it wouldn't be a full production, so therefore you wouldn't need the stars there. You wouldn't even have the director there. It would be the second unit director that would actually go out and do all these background shots, because if you notice them, a lot of the shots that were actually done in these locations didn't actually have the stars in them. There might have been one or two, maybe when they were going into that wee buggy in order to get. So they may have been there for maybe like a couple of days. It would be very limited, and it keeps the budget down because you don't have the sort of full production actually at site. And it would be the same. Most of it would be shot actually on a soundstage, and there would be a mock-up for various locations. So even the London locations as well, some of those would not be done the same way, although I'm assuming that they actually did quite a lot of work in London anyway, because they were at the Albert Hall and things like that. So, but yes, it is very noticeable. I think it's very noticeable now because we are used to a far higher standard of effects.
And that is me being unfair, because I get that this was made, obviously, well, it wouldn't have been made in 1956, it would be made maybe a year or two before that, and I get that as me being unfair, but I think just because I didn't particularly enjoy this overall when I rewatched it, I was just nitpicking at stuff like that, going, that's obvious that they're not there or not on that bus or whatever it is, so I am being unfair. Yeah,
so what did you think of the setup, the initial setup of the family, the very well-to-do American family traveling across North Africa to visit basically some of the places that he was stationed in the war more than anything else. So it's not quite your innocent American abroad. It's somebody who has seen a wee bit of the world, who's been involved in conflicts, albeit from the point of view where he was a surgeon, but he was actually in these sort of war zones and things like that. So what did you think in terms of that, and also the family dynamic as well?
I'm so glad you asked. I don't understand how a world successful singer and an army surgeon met in the first place. I assume just one of those high society dinners that people like me don't know about. But I do. The opening scenes for me are some of my favourite because they make me laugh so much. So you've got, obviously, they're on this bus. Their son, Hank, nearly causes a diplomatic incident because he rips the face veil off of a fellow traveller, and those damn Yankees just can't understand why, she's covered up in the first place. So they just think that Hank's, it's not a big deal. And of course, we're introduced to Louis Bernard, played by Daniel Gellin, who sort of translates for them and also tries to help maybe acclimatise them slightly more culturally. And then Hank continues to be racist to him by saying that he's got loads of snails and he never thought of fixing it by getting a Frenchman to eat them. So it's just super racist right from the offset. And what's interesting as well, my notes actually say Doris Day gets a sing-song just as she and James Stewart prepare to Madeleine McCann Hank by leaving him in their hotel room while they go out to dinner. So as much as they profess to want their son to sort of enjoy this environment and soak up different cultures, even though Hank calls Africa the dark continent, they clearly are still there for their sort of middle upper class, whining and dining. She's fully dressed for dinner, so is he. They meet up with the Draytons, who are this English couple that they start chatting to over dinner. James Stewart makes comments about how savage it is that there's no cutlery and he has to eat the dishes with his hands and stuff like that. So it's a very bizarre family dynamic in the sense that I don't know how the parents met, and as much as they want their son obviously to have this experience, they also just want to leave him in a hotel room and fuck off to dinner. So it's strange, but you do get the sense that they are very protective of him, of Hank. And obviously as the plot unfolds, you do sort of believe their despair and whatever. But it is a strange family setup. You kind of get the impression, and obviously because we know what Hitchcock's own family life was like, you kind of get the impression that he doesn't understand how a sort of nuclear family, in inverted commas, actually works.
Yeah, I think that's fairly obvious. I think a lot of it is for plot contrivance more than anything else. It fits in with they need this certain setup, and this is the way they're going to do it. They have to give these people a certain amount of backstory. Now, the backstory is, as you say, outlandish. The fact that she was a singer on stage in London and all across Europe, and he was a surgeon working for the US Army, and the fact there's an obvious age difference. Probably, I would estimate it as being about 25 years, probably. And that kind of fits in with the way that these sort of family dynamics were portrayed in Hollywood up until that point. There was an awful lot of the older man and the 18, 20-year-old woman getting married, and this kind of thing. He would already be successful in whatever his field is. And it mirrors it here. It's exactly the same. And it's done in such a way here as to, right, here, like you say, it's a nuclear family. This is what they are. They're not ignorant Americans who've seen a bit of the world. They know a wee bit more than just outside of what they are. But they're now in this settled American, almost imperialistic lifestyle that looking down on people. They're not just even looking down on the people in the dark continent, as they call it, like I said. They're also looking down on the people that they deal with at home, because there's an extended conversation when they're walking through the market and they're saying, you know, Mrs. Smith's gallbladder paid for this suit and all that kind of thing.
Was
you know?
awful. Like, they just came across as arseholes. Like, it was not characters that you wanted to root for at that moment when they're basically taking the piss out of patients that he obviously had back home. Yeah, that scene in particular was really galling, actually.
Yeah. Oh, well done. Galling for a gallbladder.
Ah, very good. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, we're here all week. Try the shakshuka. So what did you think of the character that Mr. Stewart played? He is obviously a successful medical practitioner, but he's a bit of a grump, to be perfectly honest.
Yes, he is not, for somebody that obviously wanted to go on this trip, he's not very happy about any aspect of it initially. I do think their dynamic is really interesting, because I have never seen Doris Day as a Hitchcock blonde in the way you would see some of the other actresses. She's not particularly sexy or alluring, which I get is part of her image that was manufactured by Hollywood in the first place. I'm fully aware of that. But I think she's obviously meant to be this sort of kind of wholesome character in this still, even though she's, you know, she's the one that when they first get to, you know, Marrakesh, she's doing sort of sideways glances and thinking we are being watched. And she has this immediate paranoia about being in this particular location. Whereas actually, by contrast, for all that this kind of falls into James Stewart's lap, he actually thinks that Lee Bernard's a great guy, and, you know, he's really chatty with him and stuff like that. He's got less time for the Draytons, and that whole dinner scene, as I say, he's very grumpy because he can't use cutlery and he doesn't like the way that, you know, the food and the way that they eat. But he's definitely, as the film progresses, you know, he's interviewed by police and he ends up screaming and shouting the place down and kind of throwing his weight around a little bit and a little, you know, don't you know who I am sort of thing. It's a kind of unusual role for James Stewart in the sense that I don't really feel this is one of his great psychological character studies like you see in Rear Window or Vertigo. I actually think that both him and Doris Day are given very little to do in terms of properly fleshing out these characters. There's a lot of hysterics and a lot of anger and a lot of grumpiness, particularly on James Stewart's part. But I don't ever really feel that you get to grips with your characters in the way that you maybe do with some of his other performances, which I think is why it's not one of my favourites as well, as I don't feel like they are fully fleshed out in a way, despite the fact they've got backstory, we understand who they are, where they've come from, etc. It's just that what we actually see on screen is just a bit two-dimensional.
He comes across as being this man who is very capable professionally, but as an emotional being, he is not very well developed at all. Like you say, he has tantrums when he's dealing with the police. Obviously, it's a stressful situation, things like that. And what I kind of got from that is that he cannot handle stressful situations that are not of his making or not within his wheelhouse. If it was an operating table, for instance, you know, he would be calmness personified because he knows what he's doing. But when he's thrown into situations where he cannot control everything, then it's a completely different story. And you get that because, well, minor plot spoil for a film that was made, some 70 years ago. His son gets kidnapped, which informs the whole second half of the film. Now, the way that he reacts to that is he drugs his wife before he tells her. I mean, what the fuck is that all about?
I know. You can't even say, oh, that's so 1950s, because I don't imagine there was too many men doing that back then.
I actually couldn't believe when he did that, just to kind of, you need to be a bit calm here, and I need a couple of hours to go and try and work some stuff out. And that whole sequence let me down a wee bit, firstly because obviously the way that he handled the situation showed that he wasn't exactly like a strong character, and two, it actually allowed for the plot to progress in a way that you didn't actually see anything at all about how it just basically, he drugged her. It was assumed that he was away for a couple of hours and he came back when she was nice and calm and just still a bit dozy and everything. And then he said, well, you know, they've got a private plane, they're out of the country and all that now, and they're saying, how the fuck did you work that out? You spent 15 minutes arguing with a policeman and getting nowhere, and suddenly you've got the wherewithal to find out all this information about these private citizens and how they left the country without as much as I had to call a few favors and things like that. And it just, that kind of took me out of it. And then, of course, it was the whole, don't you worry, dear. Yeah. Might never see your son again, but, have a wee nap. And then I'll get us all packed and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, fuck's sake, it's really...
And you could also tell that he's never done any packing in his life. Like, you could just tell that he was so inept. But you're right, there wasn't even chat of like, I had to bribe somebody to get a plane. Because I always think, how are they allowed to leave the country when they're so embroiled in, where Bernard obviously passes on a message that there's going to be this assassination. So how are they even allowed to leave the country when, the police were right in their business up until about 2 scenes ago? So it's a very strange sort of sequence of events. But I think that, I think there's something about his character being quite inept or not as strong as you would anticipate him to be that kind of lets this whole thing down. And I understand that obviously they're meant to be the sort of everyman, and I use that term loosely because obviously he is meant to be this like army surgeon.
Yeah.
But it's not, there's something about it doesn't just, all the dots don't quite join up for me in this film, which I think is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I think it's a standard device that Hitchcock uses, and when he talks about the everyman character, there is nothing everyman pretty much about all of his characters. None of them are ordinary people. They've all got these rich backstories in one way or another. Now, we will discuss a certain Cary Grant incarnation in a few moments when we move on to the other film, but it's the same sort of idea. It's not an everyman. Now, you mentioned, obviously, Doris Day and her sweetness and down-homeness. In order to look after her child, they have this lovely song that they sing together, this now Oscar-winning song. Do you think the song was just in there to emphasise the fact that she is of a motherly nature, or do you think there was something a wee bit deeper in there, in that the film informed the final act of the film in this que sera, sera, whatever will be sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm so torn on this, because one part of me thinks that she had a contract that said she was singing and frigging everything that she was doing, and this was shoehorned in horrendously. But then it does actually make sense in the final act of the film why that song is used. It's obviously a distraction technique, but also it enables her to sort of locate her son. So in that context, it makes sense. But I think it's just so strange that, because when most people sing to their kids, they don't burst out in like professional, this fully produced, well-known songs. I think that really takes you out of it in the first instance that it's used. But I do think the second time around, it is entirely justifiable. But obviously they had to set up this sort of notion that was, Joe and Hank's thing, was singing this song together, and that's how he'd be able to sort of identify his mother. So I get why it's used, but there is just something about it that makes me feel it's a contractual obligation and not a genuine thing. Yeah,
in a way as well, the message of the song, in that it doesn't really matter, things are just going to work out how they work out. Yeah. Whatever will be, informs the scene in the Albert Hall as well, where she has a decision to make now. Is that decision whatever will be, or does she act on it as well? And I think it echoed that, but I don't know if that was wholly intentional. And there was some sterling Doris Day and sort of trauma mode acting there as well. It was all done, which wasn't particularly great, but yes.
No, I mean, I think that's what there's quite a lot of acting in here that's quite bad, and I hate saying this because it's a Hitchcock film and there obviously is a prestige attached to it. I liked, is it Brenda de Banzi who played Lucy Drayton? I really liked her clipped sort of British snootiness that was just very, there was something quite, she's got the perfectly coiffured hair, she's a kind of busybody character, but she's also evil, but then she has a change of heart at the last minute. So I quite liked her character, and I liked her performance, because you kind of were looking for one of those strong character actor performances from there. But I felt like Doris Day was quite bad in this. And as I say, with James Stewart, I just felt like it just wasn't one of his better sort of reads of a character. I feel like he's an actor that usually can do, you know, he's usually an actor that really draws you in with, you know, empathy, and you're so invested in his character's emotional side, whereas you just don't get that off this character at all. And yes, Doris Day's trauma acting is not my favourite.
No, it doesn't do an awful lot for you, and it kind of takes you out a wee bit from the film. How do you think that character was treated during the film, though? The character of Jo, because, like you said, she was the one that highlighted the fact that her husband basically told his whole life story to Louis, and then time and time again she's saying, I don't trust these people, this is wrong, I don't, this is, you know, we shouldn't be doing this, and it's right through the film, and she's pretty much roundly ignored right through the film until the very last moment, which was a bit strange that they've actually turned it around at that point as well. But what did you think about that? Did you find that as incredibly frustrating as I found it?
Yeah, it's so bizarre because from the offset, she has a bad feeling about this trip. I mean, it's like in the opening scene, she's like, we're being watched.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she says to her husband. And he's so dismissive of her. It's like, you silly little international singer. What could you possibly know about the big wide world? And that's kind of the vibe that you get from James Stewart's character. And she does do a lot of detective work throughout this as well. It's not just about him. And it's interesting because she obviously, you know, like any mother, wants to get her child back. And as you've pointed out, she is drugged and then taken to another country. And, you know, it's him that has to leave the hotel room and do all the big manly investigating. But actually, it's her that finds out a lot of information. You know, she toddles along to the church by herself. She manages to sort of crack the code of what the address is. And I think she's quite a neat contrast to the character of Lucy Drayton, who you kind of get the impression is an equal to her husband in terms of the plotting that they're doing, and she is taken seriously, and, you know, she is given important tasks to do, and she's left in charge of obviously Hank while he is living his little kidnap life in the church roof. So the Draytons dynamic is a lot more equal. They seem to be on a much more equal footing, whereas the McKennas, yeah, she's treated as this sort of silly little woman, which again I feel like is slightly unusual for a Hitchcock film. I'm not saying Hitchcock treated women well, but I do feel like in other films they're seen as a bit more credible, either in terms of a threat or in terms of their sort of seductiveness and intelligence, whereas she is just kind of treated like a bit of a wee fanny in this. I don't mean that. I can't even think of another word, but she's just sort of really dismissed from the offset, whereas it's her detective work and her quick thinking at the end that kind of brings it all together, not his.
Yeah. It's her lack of agency, I think. It's just not. She doesn't have. The film doesn't respect her in the way that, for instance, the character of Marion gets more respect in Psycho. She's seen as being a very intelligent, a very capable person, and that's kind of followed through. You don't get the same. Yeah, I don't know if that's a lesson learned, but I don't think so, to be honest. I think it is just the way that they decided the story would actually play out. Now, in terms of that, the story is split between two locations. You're talking about Marrakesh, and you're talking about London. I make that sound as if it's kind of an even split. It's not really. The film doesn't really kick into gear for about 30 minutes. You've got the whole thing in Marrakesh. Yes, there's build-up and everything, but it's only when he receives a phone call saying, we have your son, don't talk to anybody about anything. And then that's when it really sort of, the story really kind of unfolds. Obviously, you do need to have the sort of preamble in that way. But do you think that kind of worked, or do you think it was too long in the sort of build-up and then the execution of it?
It's difficult to say. I did feel this was a long 2 hours, but at the same time, you kind of do need that background. You do need Joe's paranoia and Benjamin's over-friendliness. You do need the scene where Louis Bernard obviously is running through the market to reveal the assassination attempt. You do need to establish who the Draytons are in order for them to make sense to the rest of the plot. So you do need this stuff. But it just, I don't know, I felt like there was an awful lot of time wasted when they get back to London, and there's the scenes in the hotel room where I think it's Joe's like sort of old like singing friends appear, although there is a lovely appearance by Cindy Fontaine, who is Morticia Addams in the TV show of the Addams Family, so you can spot that as a wee sort of nice appearance. But to me, there was a lot of those scenes that were very superfluous that could have absolutely been taken out. You kind of need the initial plot establishing points because it is quite a convoluted plot and you do need to understand what's happening. I actually felt it was later on in the film that there were some scenes that could have been cut because they just felt like there was a lot of chat and nothing was actually, there was no big reveal or even hints or red herrings being dropped. It was just chatter. So I felt it was later on in the film that it really grounds to a halt, actually.
Yeah, I actually noted it down that I felt that the pacing was languid. So I was obviously being very flowery at the time. But
Yes.
yeah, in so many of the scenes, there could have been cuts to, it would still get the same point across. Like you were saying, when Louis was getting chased through the market, that was about 4 or 5 minutes, and it just kept going and kept going, and it didn't need to be that length really for the plot. This could have been like a tight 90-minute film, and it would have been just as good, and it would have hit all of the plot points as well. I mean, if you think about it, at the very start, in the titles, you have music playing in the Albert Hall. It is the Cloud Storm. That's what the piece of music called. Yeah,
and you get the big cymbals crash. That's how it opens. Yeah.
So that was about 2 minutes right there. And right after that, it says, now I did have this down, yes, a single crash of cymbals and how it rocked the lives of an American family. And you're thinking, okay, the crash of cymbals doesn't happen until the last 3 minutes of the film. Everything that's happened to the American family has fucking happened before then. It's not happening with the crash. Yeah, there's a certain amount of aftermath, which you don't see because that's the end of the film. But it's like, my goodness me, and there's too many fillers.
There's a lot of plot points where I do really like. So there's a scene where James Stewart thinks he's going to find Ambrose Chapel a person, and I do really like that scene where he's walking down the street and there's this sort of echoey footsteps, because it reminded me of what was the other one we watched, Torn Curtain, with the scene across the floor. I do really like when things like that are done very well. But then you've got that scene in the taxidermist office that goes on for fucking ages when he's established, obviously it's the wrong person, that Ambrose Chapel is a church, not a person. But that goes on for far too long as well. And I get that it's meant to be a sort of red herring, but you actually didn't need any of that scene. You could have had the footsteps and then him maybe going back to Jo and saying, I don't think Ambrose Chapel is a person, and she's obviously already at the location. But it just went on for ages, and it was actually silly and quite pathetic because none of them looked like they were capable of a fight anyway, and yet it goes on for quite some time.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. But there was also the bit where, when they arrive in Britain, not so much the fact that they were able to leave where they were at, with, like you say, without too much, they're embroiled. There's a murder investigation ongoing, but yeah, they can leave and they can go to London. But when they get to London, they're interviewed by the police at the airport, and basically they're saying, we know there's something going to be happening. This guy, like Louis, was working in cooperation with British intelligence. So, can you tell us what's going on? And obviously they're not going to. But then they just say, okay, then, right, thank you very much. Just on your way. And you're kind of going, that would never happen. They would never just let them go and not even like tail them, for instance. They had no surveillance on them whatsoever. They could go about and do what, like you say, go and find this Ambrose Chapel. And it's like, for fuck's sake, it would not happen.
Yeah, because when she tries to call the police from the actual chapel, and she's like, oh, we've already spoken to whatever the inspector's name is. And then the policemen are like, oh, well, this isn't our patch. We'll only give you a lift. And even they're just so blasé about, she's saying that she's spoken to somebody who presumably is really high up. She alludes to quite a big scandal. And these policemen are like, oh, sorry, missus, we'll drop you off at the nearest, whatever it is. And none of it makes sense, to be honest with you. But again, that's just a sort of minor issue in amongst all the other issues I have with this film.
Yeah, and there was a whole contrivance. It was Buchanan, and Inspector Buchanan it was. And he says at the end of the conversation, fine, okay, right, I realise you can't tell me anything. Here's my number, get in contact with me. If anything comes up, I can always be reached. And she phones him and she gets his second in command, and the first thing he says is, no, I can't get in touch with him. You're like, come on.
That's an absolute classic. That is so funny.
And that's only there to create tension and create drama, which you wouldn't have because they've gone through the whole proper steps to avoid creating tension and drama by setting this. And you're, come on, really? But What did you think of the inclusion of Bernard Herrmann not just doing the score, but actually on screen in this
Yeah,
instance as well.
do you know, there's it's funny because there's so many lovely little appearances in this. As I said earlier, you've got Cindy Fontaine, you've got Bernard Herrmann, and the guy who plays the French marksman, Rian, I think his name is actually the guy who plays the demon in Salem's Lot. So you do have these lovely little appearances from people who are really well known. But yeah, no, I enjoyed the inclusion of Bernard Herrmann. I forgot that he sort of does appear as the conductor in this, but I do think it is a really nice touch because obviously we're so used to the Hitchcock cameos in his films, and you're constantly looking out for them. This feels almost like a sort of a wee extra treat, which is deserved because, as I say, it's a long 2 hours.
Especially since he's actually Bernard Herrmann in the film. He's not just a conductor. It's quite a nice wee touch. It's a wee callback, like you said, to the fact that Bernard Herrmann is a real person. And he doesn't need to do a hell of a lot of acting, because when you're conducting, you're naturally almost acting anyway. It's a performance in his part doing that. So yes, I thought that was pretty decent. What did you think about the ending of the film?
Oh, do you know what? I think it all started to fall apart for me is the scene where James Stewart and Doris Day go into the church, and she's almost like too good a singer for the congregation, so they all notice that she's there. So I find that all started to unravel from there. And then there's a few other issues in the sense that, you know, she is told repeatedly by I think at least 2 people in the Royal Albert Hall that she can't get in without a ticket, and yet somehow she ends up standing at the back. And obviously you've got this big dramatic piece of music. She obviously is keeping her eye on the box. You've got Rian, who's the marksman, who's sort of making his way through the back of the box, is a kind of corridor along there, and she obviously results in a scream, which I don't know. That felt ridiculous. And then you've got this. So that to me almost felt like an ending in itself. And then you've got this little afterthought plot where she obviously has to now sing around a piano again to get her son back, who's being held by the Draytons still. Lucy Drayton has him in a room upstairs, and obviously the son hears his mother singing and he's like, "That's my mama." And then Lucy, for some reason, has a change of heart and lets him go. And then you've got a couple of other sort of plot foils. People fall downstairs, people fall off balconies. I don't know. It all feels a bit messy for me. Like, I think that there was an attempt to, it almost feels like do 2 or 3 different endings. The Albert Hall sequence in itself is impressive. I've actually got this written down. It lasts 12 minutes and there's no talking for quite a lot of it. It's very atmospheric. But she just stands and cries as well at the back instead of alerting the police to a potential assassination attempt. And there is a really nice shot where you've got the gun peeking around the corner and stuff like that, or the shot where you see from sort of inside the symbols. And there is good stuff, but I just feel like it's a really messy ending. It feels like the film ended 2 or 3 times over in order to wrap up plot points that they had brought in obviously earlier on. Yes,
yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. It does seem to extend itself a little bit, which is a little unfortunate. I was just glad it was over in the end, to be perfectly honest. I did enjoy the film, but it did go on a wee bit for me, which is a bit unfortunate. Having said that, and you've mentioned a couple already, were there any other scenes or little Hitchcock-type elements that was a highlight for you?
I do think it's funny that we obviously know that Alfred Hitchcock has a sort of phobia, I guess you would call it, of religion, or a fear of religion. So I do think it's quite fitting that the Draytons, who are sort of ostensibly the villains, are found there, like inside the church. So I do like that as a kind of touch. As anyone who sort of knows their Hitchcock, you kind of realise why they've done what they've done. And as I say, I do really like, there's a couple of beautiful shots. As I say, I do love the one from inside the symbols. I do really like that sort of sweeping shot where you go into Mr. Drayton's room above the church and it reveals him and Rian sort of plotting together. And there's a lot of really nice high shots. I think James Stewart and Doris Day are often kind of shot from above, especially when they're in embrace. So there is really nice touches to it. But this is a film where you quite literally have like blackface, open racism, some bizarre performances or just kind of weak performances. I don't know, there is nice touches, but it just doesn't work for me. And I haven't watched this for years. And I was really surprised watching it back how much I just didn't enjoy it.
No, I can kind of get that. For me, there was 2 shots that I really liked. One was in the church when they were having the service, and the Draytons didn't know that they were in the church. And they hadn't, because Doris Day's quite small, so she was kind of hidden behind somebody. And the way that they hid James Stewart character was they put a pillar in front of him
Yes.
because he's really tall. And I just liked that, and I thought that was quite an elegant way of actually getting around the fact that he's this really tall guy. And there was another scene just after that where the police had actually turned up at the hall when it was all closed, and it was quite a high shot. And it was done in such a way that they kind of merged two shots together almost. And she was standing at the front with the policeman trying to get in. And meanwhile, at the back, they were coming out at the back.
Yes.
And going into the car and everything. I thought that was really nice. It was a really lovely shot, the way that they did that. It was very clever in the way they did that, actually sort of matting these two things together, because probably for production reasons more than anything else, it would be more difficult to actually try and arrange a shot like that. The logistics of it would be quite difficult, but I thought that was excellent. It really was. Now, this film shares a title with a 1934 film, also directed by Alfred Hitchcock, but it is a very different beast indeed. This one is set in the Alps, with the everyman being a ski jumper.
I know. I feel like if somebody needed to sit Hitchcock down at one point and go, "You do realise these are not normal jobs? Like he's not like a bin man or doesn't work in an office or something."
Yeah. So the very basics of this story are the same, and I mean that in the most loosest term.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they share only the title more than anything else. Now, you've seen the 1934 version. What did you think of it in terms of as a comparison to the 54 version?
Yeah, I won't lie, I haven't seen this for a good number of years, but I do. I mean, interesting. I'm just looking at it now. It's only an hour and 15 minutes. So it's a lot tighter for starters. I do think it is interesting in terms when a director sort of remakes his own work, as it were, because this does obviously have scale in the sense that it is sort of set, or it starts off in Switzerland, but I feel like this one is a lot more, I don't know how to describe it, maybe like a kind of like ostensibly British. It's obviously part of his much earlier work, closer to his silent movies, and you've obviously got the great Peter Lorre appearing in this one as well. But as I say, in terms of like tightness, I remember watching that and thinking it felt like a proper sort of political spy thriller, whereas this 1956 version feels a lot more flowery, and as I say, there's a couple of sing-songs thrown in there, and I didn't think the performances, or the lead performances certainly were as good. You've obviously, I think it's Leslie Banks and Edna Best are the married couple, the Lawrences in the first film, and albeit it's a different style of acting because I say it's 20 years earlier, but I remember feeling that it was a lot tighter, that film, and just the suspense is maybe a bit better. But as I say, I haven't seen it in a long time, so I feel like I probably need to go back and rewatch. But it's certainly not as flowery as the 50s version from what I can remember. No, definitely not. Like I say, it focuses more on the story. The female lead has a lot more agency. She's got a far better role in this. Nobody sings, as far as I'm aware, which is obviously a good point. I watched it about a month ago just to contrast and compare. And yes, it is a very, very different film as well. It's interesting to note that Alfred Hitchcock, in his conversation with Francois Truffaut, he said of the film that the first version is the work of a talented amateur and the second was made by a professional. So, ooh, interesting. So he obviously has a lot more love for that 1956 version. Yes, I think it's because it's more of a production. It's more of a cinematic event. Whereas the first one... I did say that at the start of this. There's definitely spectacle about it. There absolutely is. It's just not my favourite Hitchcock film. Having spoken about it for the last 30, 40 minutes, would you recommend this film? I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm actually going to say no. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rewatch the original because, as I say, it's been quite some time since I've seen it, but I have a strong feeling that that's the better film. I think if you want to see a great James Stewart performance in a Hitchcock film, you know, watch Rear Window, watch Vertigo. This is just, it feels too messy for me. I think that's the best word I can use to describe it. It feels like a bit of a messy film, and yeah, just not my favourite Hitchcock. So I think I'm going to pass on this one. I don't think I will recommend it. Yeah.
probably agree with you on that one. It's more second string Hitchcock.
Yeah.
It would be one that you would watch after watching the big hitters, one you would go back to and take up, rather than watching it ahead of something like North by Northwest or Vertigo or anything like that. It's definitely not up there with those ones, which is a bit of a shame, but, you know, can't like everything, and you can't have hit after hit all the time. As I say,
That's
this
true.
was...
And you said this was a hit, so it's not like it, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not doing any reputational damage by saying this isn't my favourite. It's just, it's interesting though that, and I can see why in 1956 a film like this would have been popular, given its stars, given the scope of its location, and obviously given the plot. You know, we're sort of post-war, you know, rumblings of Cold War, all that sort of thing. I can see why this type of film did well. It would be interesting to see if somebody remade this now, what it would look like.
Oh, it would be very different now. They would highlight the more spy aspects of it rather than the wife singing before getting drunk aspects of it.
I mean, surely this is a Lady Gaga role in Waiting, you know?
Oh, yeah, that'd be good. And now, of course, you would have it more gender neutral as well. You'd be talking about remakes that would be all-encompassing, which is a good thing, obviously. So it would be interesting to see. I don't think it would even be as good, though, as the film we're actually reviewing, which is saying something, because there's a whole lot of expectation on any sort of remakes. I mean, look at the remake of Psycho, for instance. And look at Brian Palma's career. He's basically taken so many elements of Hitchcock in pretty much every film that he's done. So, yes, all good. So that's us for the first film. We shall now move on to the second film of our double bill. This is regarded by a lot of people as being sort of premier Hitchcock, sort of the top of the tree, if you like. It's one that if you asked people to name a Alfred Hitchcock film, this would be one that would be on a large number of people's lips as their first choice, I would imagine. I am, of course, talking about North by Northwest, which was made in 1959.
Roger Thornhill, Manhattan advertising executive.
My name is Thornhill. Well, obviously, you've mistaken me for somebody else.
I'd like you to tell me how much you know. Simple yes or no. The least I can do is afford you the opportunity of surviving the evening.
A simple no. For the simple reason I simply don't know what you're talking about.
Poor sucker got mistaken for George Kaplan.
How long do you think he'll stay alive?
Well, that's his problem.
Goodbye, Mr. Thornhill, wherever you are.
It is, again, directed by Hitchcock, starring Cary Grant, Eve Marie Saint, and James Mason, who has the most wonderful voice. I could just listen to James Mason talking all day. You know, I say, James, here's the phone book. Just start it
absolutely,
and let's go. Yeah. The film itself came from an original screenplay, which is sort of half and half about what Hitchcock did. He spent an awful lot of time remaking books, adapting them for the screen and things like that. But on occasion, he did actually have original screenplays as well. And this was one by a writer called Ernest Lehman, who was given the remit to actually write a Hitchcock picture to end all Hitchcock pictures.
Ooh.
So, story itself is basically a story of mistaken identity. And in the real world, this would have been sorted out in about 2 minutes' time.
Yes.
You wouldn't have had a 2-hour man out of place thriller here. Basically, you have Cary Grant, who plays the part of... Oh, what's his name again? I forgot.
Roger Thornhill.
Thornhill. He is mistaken for the mysterious George Kaplan when he calls over a waiter who is looking for George Kaplan in a bar. But what he's actually doing is he's trying to order himself a rather nice Gibson martini rather than anything else. But he's mistaken for George Kaplan, and there are people looking for Kaplan. And basically the whole thing kicks off from there. There is spies. There is the femme fatale. There is the wonderful locations, both in the city of New York and elsewhere within the country. Some of them are very well known indeed. So what we have here is basically Thornhill trying to tell these guys who are after him and basically contrive to kill him at one point that he's not who they think he is. And there we go. I think without really getting into too much
it. Yeah, that is pretty much
we
it.
don't really need to expand on that because we'll talk about it as we go through the film itself. So, initial thoughts again. What did you think? Is this one of your faves?
One of my favourite films of all time, not just even my favourite Hitchcock. I just think that, interestingly, I read that this is considered a Bond prototype in terms of film, because you have the dashing lead, as you say, the femme fatale, the locations, the stunts, all that. And you can absolutely see that. I think you've got Cary Grant at his funniest, most charming, most handsome, like that suit, which we'll talk about because obviously the suit is quite a prominent part of this film. You've got, Eve Marie Saint, who is this, beautifully seductive, husky, what side is she on type of character. And then you've got these absolutely brilliant villains. And you've got the subplot of the professor and his little group of spies. And also one of my favourite performances, which is Jessie Royce Landis, who plays Clara Thornhill, Roger's mother, because she is sarcastic, heckling. She doesn't help him at all when he's in this situation. And there's so many one-liners in this film. Like initially when, Roger Thornhill gets kidnapped, he's like, oh, well, don't tell me where I'm going then, surprise me. And it's Cary Grant at his best. I adore this film. Like no amount of times of rewatching it is going to take away any enjoyment. And interestingly, this actually runs for 2 hours, 16 minutes, which is obviously longer than The Man Who Knew Too Much, but it flies in. The pacing is spot on here.
Yep, I think you're totally right. It is a completely different type of film to The Man Who Knew Too Much, in that the tone of it is really, really different. It also helps that there's not a child being kidnapped in it, which kind of darkens it a wee, darkens the film a wee bit.
Yeah.
But the whole tone of the film from start to finish, there's a slight comedic tone all the way through, like you have highlighted there. But not just in those sort of elements, like even with his interactions with basically everybody around him. He, like his secretary, for instance, the way that he speaks to her and the way that she organizes his whole day and everything to do with that. It's fabulous. It works really, really well as a film. Now, it was interesting that this is a film that followed Vertigo, and Hitchcock wanted a complete change of style with this. He didn't want to do another darker film. He wanted to do something that was a little more light-hearted, something that would be easy for people to actually connect with in terms of actually enjoyment of the film. Something slightly different, but still with the Hitchcock elements of it. Given the fact that Vertigo was such a big hit and is still regarded as such an important film in his canon, do you think this was a wee bit of a risk for him in terms of what he was trying to do here, moving away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I can see why somebody like Hitchcock would be stubborn enough to go, oh, did you enjoy that? Well, I'm not doing that again. I can absolutely see why he's done that, because I did read that James Stewart petitioned for the lead in this and was told very kindly, thank you, but you're too old. And I actually don't think there's that big an age gap between him and Cary Grant, but I think obviously this is part of this sort of new direction. I feel like Cary Grant can do that sort of charming, sort of off the cuff remark a lot better than James Stewart can. Do you know, when I look at this film and you look at Vertigo, it's almost kind of hard to believe they are done by the same director. There are obvious traits that they share, but this to me feels like a summer blockbuster that was decades ahead of its time. Like, it's aged really well. There's a couple of jokes that are mildly icky, but I feel like it's aged really well. The performances are great. It's not entirely ludicrous in its plot, but I can also understand why, having done something so heavy and intense as Vertigo, and this is still something that has lots of different plots going on, and at times the audience is probably just as confused as Roger as to what the fuck is going on and who Kaplan is and all the rest of it, but it's dealt with in a much lighter way. I'm not saying these are like mustache twirling villains or anything like that, but even their sort of campness is apparent from the offset. And yeah, I feel like it probably was a risk, but I feel like with someone with Hitchcock, does a risk really exist? He's so masterful at what he does, and he's so good at he's good at identifying a story, whether that's an adaptation of a book or just a fresh script. He's so good at picking out a story that he knows is going to give him that sort of big cinematic spectacle. And as I say, for me, this feels like a blockbuster that was decades ahead of its time.
Oh, definitely, yes. Like you say, it was almost like a prototype for the spy genre going forward into the 60s. Definitely was. I think it probably was a wee bit of a risk for him in terms of the fact that the public can be very fickle. You're only as good as your last hit. Always. So there was that sort of element to it. In terms of the casting of it, like you say, James Stewart was petitioning for it. There's actually a story that, and I don't know the truth of this, but he was actually promised this role because he'd seen it, because obviously Hitchcock was developing this when Vertigo was in production, and James Stewart had seen the initial drafts of it and said he wanted to do it, and Hitchcock had said, "That's fine, the role's yours," but then had a change of heart, and he actually delayed production so that it was going to cause a clash with another thing that James Stewart had actually signed up for and couldn't get out of. It might have been
that is cheeky.
How the West was one. I'm not sure if it was that one, but it was something that it meant they couldn't do it, so therefore he had to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're stuck in the sort of a schedule, we'll have to go with somebody else." And he had Cary Grant in mind for it pretty much all the time. Now,
wow. I mean, you can't picture anyone but Cary Grant in this role, can you? It's such a Cary Grant role, like the charisma, I love the scene where they get him, steaming on bourbon and all that. It's because he's so good at physical comedy, and I just think I cannot imagine James Stewart in this role at all, in the way that this is, to me, one of the sort of best Cary Grant performances as well. He's brilliant in it.
Yeah, I think what Cary Grant does is he takes roles and Cary Grants them, if you like. Which is a very simplistic way of saying he's a very, very good actor, and he is very good at what he does. Now, what did you think of him in this role in terms of his age and the character that he actually portrayed?
Do you know, it's funny, I have no issue with his age in this film, but then at the same time, obviously we have the famous crop duster scene, and you're kind of going, are you getting up from that completely unscathed? But I do think it works, because I think everybody else around him, apart from obviously Eve Marie Saint, is of a similar age, and you do get the impression that this spy that they're looking for is someone who's quite distinguished and someone who's obviously is quite charming, travels all over the world and has a wide network. So I feel like in that sense you probably don't question that as much. But I do believe that I think Jessie Royce Landis was probably only about 5 or 6 years older than him, and she was playing his mother. So again, there's that classic Hollywood ageism and sexism going on there. But I am so wrapped up in this character and so wrapped up in the way that Cary Grant portrays him that I feel like you could probably say anything about this film to me and I'd have a defence for it, because I just love it so much.
There is a bit where the initial meeting between James Mason and Cary Grant, and he said, you're not what we expected. You're far better dressed than the usual ones that we get. So, yes, I think there was an element of that, and that Cary Grant wanted to be portrayed in a certain way, and it's obviously the costume and everything was very important, as it always is within Hitchcock films, mostly for the female leads, I would say, rather than the male, obviously with the influence of Edith Head more than anything else. But any chance to get Cary Grant into a sort of light grey suit is I think it's very welcome.
Martin Landau's character, I can't remember what he's called, but he turns around and goes, he's a well-tailored one. And there's almost like a spark of jealousy there at how good he looks when they finally kidnap him.
Yeah. Interestingly, again, Eve Marie Saint is, in her character, she is up front, she's 26 years old in this. Now, it must have been a similar age gap to our previous conversation here, I would think, which even when I watched these when I was younger, I thought it's a bit icky.
I don't know. I feel like it's. I'm not going to defend this because it's not appropriate. It's just not. But I also feel like because her character is presented as somebody who's extremely capable and intelligent, and she's sort of game for him verbally, or game for Roger verbally, like she's obviously streets ahead of him in terms of, you know, the emotional intelligence and the street smarts that she has. He almost seems kind of like not immature in comparison, but she can definitely handle herself, and she's obviously embroiled with James Mason's character Van Damme, and you know, she's living a sort of very, you know, on the edge kind of life there. So I almost feel like it doesn't feel as bad because she is, I don't know, she obviously is at an emotional or intelligence level that feels much higher than, for example, Doris Day's character, or at least certainly the way that she's treated. I would say that Roger sees Eve as not competition, but certainly an equal. As I say, she's game for him very verbally, whereas in The Man Who Knew Too Much, as we've said, James Stewart completely dismisses any of Doris Day's concerns outright. So whilst it probably is a similar age gap, it somehow feels like she is on a more sort of equal footing to his character, at least. However, having said that, I Like Your Flavour is one of the lines in cinema that makes me feel physically sick every time it is uttered. And anytime I've been to see this film at the GFT, when they do their little Hitchcock retrospectives, that line always gets a ugh from the audience, and quite rightly so.
Do you think that she was as good as Cary Grant in this film? Because it was quite an early film role for her. She had been in a few things, but she was still in the process of breaking through and becoming a major actor. Do you think she kind of holds her own here, given that
absolutely.
Cary Grant is such a persona?
They're playing very different roles here, and I assume that any young actress at the time knew going into a Hitchcock film kind of what was expected, and it is that sort of seductive, icy, you know, intelligent blonde, obviously, as is usually the case. And I think that she gives a lot more to this character. She's not just some sort of like flimsy, you know, she's not the bad guy's mole, and she's not Roger's little bit on the side either. She's someone who has a backstory that we never quite get to grips with, which I think is what makes her so interesting as well. You know, how did she end up in the hands of Philip Van Damme and his, you know, assortment of goons? And why is she the one that's been sent to tail who she believes obviously is Kaplan, but is Roger Thornhill, sorry. So I think that she has, you can tell that there's a lot more nuance and a lot more layers to this character, and she's almost the kind of straight man to Cary Grant's little comedy thing that he has going on. You know, one of the best lines in this film is "Something wrong with your eyes." Yes, they're sensitive to questions, which I absolutely love. But she would never say something like that. Yes, there's sort of flirty banter between them when they meet, and she's obviously quite coquettish and obviously wants him in her cabin for the evening. But there's never a suggestion that she is there to crack jokes. She's definitely someone who is very serious about what she's the task that she's been set. So absolutely, given that she is, you know, literally quite young in this role and sort of young into her career as well, I think she more than holds her own against, you know, Cary Grant, James Mason, Martin Landau, you know, a host of big names. And she is definitely, she's seen as one of the most iconic, I think, sort of Hitchcock blondes, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned, obviously, James Mason there. So what did you think in terms of the supporting characters in this? How do you think contributed to the overall story and film, and what are your sort of thoughts on these actors as well?
I mean, I love the supporting cast in this film. I actually don't think there's a bad performance. As I said, I love Jessie Royce Landis, who plays Clara Thornhill, Cary Grant's mother, ostensibly, because there are scenes where she obviously doesn't realise it's life and death, and she's making sassy remarks about how shitty is it at being a person. So I love her. I think she's brilliant in this. And in a way, it makes you understand where Roger gets the sense of humour. So it all ties in really nicely. In terms of the sort of bad guys, you obviously have, James Mason as Philip Van Damme. And as you said, he has the most beautiful voice, but there is something that's very, very threatening about him. And with Martin Landau at his side, they're quite a formidable pair, just physically, the way that they hold themselves and they move across a room. And both of them have this quite intense stare that, whilst Cary Grant sort of cracking quips and, saying, "Let me out here, fellas, it's just it's a mixed up identity," or whatever, there's no joking around from these guys as well. And I think that's what Hitchcock gets really right in this film, is that the threat is quite palpable. And then you also have the kind of subplot where you've got the professor, who they have quite a lot of talking in room scenes, if you know what I mean, where they're sort of plotting out, Kaplan's next move and all these different agents and stuff like that. So even that's a little interesting subplot. I wouldn't say that it's a particularly dominant performance in comparison to likes of Mason and Landau, but I think everything feels very, very credible here. The threat levels, the seduction, the comedy, and the fact that there's a spy network, everything feels very, very credible, I think, and that's testament to the performances that are given. Yeah, I liked how the whole point of the supporting cast was to lend a certain amount of gravitas to it. They were very good actors in those roles, and also, like you say, it's very straight. That's just where all the drama is. This is where the thrilling elements are, and initially, because the role that Grant is playing here is quite comedic, it's quite light. He's making as light as possible, but like I say, everything below that is very, very serious. These are serious people, that there is a certain amount of threat there. I like the dynamic between the James Mason character and the Martin Landau character, because James Mason basically just stood still and spoke, and he spoke very deliberately. He always made eye contact. He never lost his train of thought at all. He never raised his voice. It was always at the same level, and it was always utterly polite in everything he said. Whereas Martin Landau, if he had a moustache, he would have twirled it. I feel like he was ready to get physical. He wanted a kind of brawl, as it were, whereas, James Mason is this kind of closed sort of, but I love characters like that. We've talked about like the likes of, great villains, like, your Hans Landis and stuff over the year. The great villains don't have to move, they don't have to shout, they're this presence that is a very, credible threat, and James Mason absolutely nails that. He is quite literally the straight guy standing there bolt upright, not moving, while Cary Grant's rolling about a sofa, which so well done. So well done. Yeah, it was that was one of the funny elements, the fact that they poured so much alcohol down him and then put him in the car. And again, this goes back to the rear projection element as well. Of we have Roger in the car furiously turning the wheel, and the car's still going in a straight line, but the background is swaying all over the place and everything. That I thought it was really well done. It's been done so many times, but when they do it well like that, then it's more comedic than dramatic, but it's still quite a lot of fun to it. I really do enjoy it. Now, I did mention briefly that there were several locations used in this film. And for a lot of people, that is what they remember of this film. There are two areas. One where you have previously mentioned it with the biplane, and also there's the big finale on Mount Rushmore as well. But apart from that, there was another couple of sort of like pretty good locations. There's obviously a big scene set in an auction house, and also in the UN as well. Yeah. So what did you think of the use of this? Like you say, this is a sort of prototype for the sort of Bond
franchise, moving from one glamorous place to another and setting a drama there. Do you think that worked?
Yeah, because I think that there's a legitimacy to the change in locations, because Van Damme and his goons genuinely believe that Kaplan is an international spy who moves around. They talk about how he stays in hotel rooms for 2 to 3 days and is, before he moves on to the next location. I think we get the crop duster scene just over an hour into the film, and even if you've seen this film a million times over, it's still really thrilling to watch, I think, because obviously it culminates in a sort of big explosion, and you've got Cary Grant tanking it towards the camera in this, still in this glorious suit that he's getting all dusty every time he dives into the crops. But I think, that and the Mount Rushmore scene in particular, because obviously that's on the poster, so that's what you remember most about it. And albeit it does look a tiny bit ropey when you watch it back now, it's kind of looks like a set. It probably is a set. So it's one of these things where it hasn't aged particularly well in terms of the use of a set and the fact that they're quite obviously not hanging off Mount Rushmore, but the thrill of it is still there. This is one of the dangling somebody off the Eiffel Tower. That's the equivalent. I feel it's one of these massively iconic landmarks, and it feels really, I don't know, it just feels like such a fitting ending to it. They're obviously traveling about by train, but even the train feels slightly glamorous because it's all like, silver service for dinner, and they get dressed, for dinner and stuff like that. So there is a glamour to it, which is sort of undercut by this danger where, there's the scene where Roger's trying to sort of break into Van Damme's house and signal to Eve that she's in danger if she gets on the plane and leaves with him. And even that is, Cary Grant's dangling off somebody's garden trellis. It feels dangerous. It feels like something that Cary Grant in his perfect suit shouldn't be doing. So I think the use of location works. It feels glamorous. It feels violent. It's thrilling. And as I say, although some of the practical effects or special effects maybe don't hold up, I don't think it takes away from your enjoyment of watching it. I think it's perfectly executed.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned violence there. There is actually very little violence in this film. There is obviously the big end setup where they're fighting on Mount Rushmore. And for me, that looks really good because it doesn't look like the Roger character is in any way able to fight. It's very much scrambling and everything.
Yeah.
And there is only one other sort of violent scene where there's a shooting as well, which is still in the shadow of Mount Rushmore. And that's the only sort of two elements of violence in the whole film. The rest of it is drama and build-up. There's implied violence, but it doesn't really come to very much.
So I feel like that's maybe what I'm hinting at then. So I feel like the scene in the auction house in particular, there's an insinuation as to how Eve is treated by Van Damme. So I feel like there's maybe an insinuation of violence, perhaps more than it actually ever sort of appears on screen. So I think that kind of threat level feels, as I say, sort of dangerous in a way, because obviously you don't know what Eve's fate might be if, Van Damme and Martin Landau's character actually sort of work out what she's been doing. So there's probably an implied violence more than an actual violence. But as I say, these are the sort of iconic cinema moments that if you were to say to somebody, think of an iconic cinema scene, you would guarantee somebody would mention the Mount Rushmore or the crop duster, because it's unbelievably well done. Like seriously, to have achieved this in, back in 1959, and Cary Grant sort of pulling it off as well, which I think is a big part of it, is how he actually acts his way out of these situations, given that he is sort of seen as this sort of comedic, sort of charismatic, I don't want to say buffoon, but do you know what I mean? Like, he's obviously not a spy, so how he carries these situations as well, or these scenes, is what makes them work. Yeah,
I like the fact that they weren't given permission to shoot at the UN.
Yes, so he's just cutting down the steps.
Yeah. So they actually did it sort of almost like guerrilla style. Did it without actual permission. I thought that was really good. I think the whole scene around the crop duster is like a masterclass in cinema. The way that it builds it up. You have the North by Northwest motif there, whether you like it or not, by the way that the road is actually showing as well, and there's like a real build up to it in that he's standing there waiting for Kaplan to arrive, and there's a small red herring. Now this one is over and done with in 2 minutes because somebody turned. He's standing standing across the road from a bus stop in the middle of nowhere. This guy turns up, gets out of a truck, and standing there, and he automatically assumes he's Kaplan, so he goes over and starts to engage him in conversation.
Yeah.
And there's no music or nothing. It's all very quiet. All you're just sort of hearing, like the odd sort of wind sounds and everything. So there's nothing to indicate any sort of drama. And you occasionally hear the plane flying in the background as well and all that. And just that, and it's only at that point when he figures out that this guy isn't Kaplan because he gets on the bus and the guy says, it's really strange with that plane, it's not actually dusting anything, or there's no crops there. So why is it doing that? And that's almost just like a small aside. And then obviously it starts to sort of kick off after that. But I thought that the whole build up to that was done very economically. It didn't waste an awful lot of time, even though it seemed to last forever. But that's good writing for you, and it's good filmmaking as well. The way that they put it all together, I really enjoyed that. So, what did you think about the pacing of this film?
So I think this film gets the pacing really right in a way that The Man Who Knew Too Much just doesn't. So we're thrown into the story really quickly, so we understand within the first 15 minutes that this is a case of mistaken identity, and we are going along with Roger sort of for the journey of how he either escapes or solves the riddle of who Kaplan is. So I think the pacing is really well done. We move really quickly into, as I say, their murder attempt on him, although death by bourbon does sound like one of the more pleasant ways to go. And then, we're introduced to Eva Marie Saint's character really well as well. So I think what helps is the fact that the character introductions are really strong and we understand immediately what they're there to do in terms of Roger's story. So I think that really helps. And in terms of, we do move around location, but it's justified because Roger, in his mind anyway, is tailing Kaplan, who he actually believes exists. And therefore, every time we move to, a train station or a hotel room or whatever it is, these sort of bigger locations, it is genuine. And there is a need for him to go and track down this particular person so that he can go, look, here's the guy you're chasing. It's not me. This is George Kaplan. So everything feels very justified. And I just think that the writing and the pacing are incredible. I think the little sort of peppery bits of comedy really help as well, because just when you think things might be getting a bit serious and a bit too dangerous, there's another lovely one-liner thrown in there, or another lovely bit of sort of physical comedy. So I think that the fact that that's in there sort of breaks it up as well. But I definitely just think it flies in terms of, as I say, 2 hours, 16 minutes, and it's gone like that, especially if you've seen it before and you're perhaps maybe waiting for the blockbuster scene or whatever. So you are kind of moving towards these points. But I think this is really well done. And as I say, I think part of that is the way the characters are introduced. You are very clear what everybody is there to do and how they're going to move the next part of this story along.
Yeah, I felt that it kind of set its stall out very early, right from the very first scene, where he is walking out of an office building with his secondary, his personal assistant or whatever, and they walk out onto and the street is mobbed. It's really busy. It's bustling. Obviously, and that helps. This is how we are paced. This is how we're going to pace this film. It's going to be fast moving. It's going to be fast talking. So please keep up, because you can miss things in this film. But it's not the kind of film that you can just kind of keep an eye on now and again. You really need to know what's going on. And that initial sequence where they're just walking down the street, he's giving them instructions about everything he needs to do. It's so important because it introduces the pace of the film, but also introduces the type of person he is and his relationship with his mother, because he mentions her right away as well, which I felt was really, really good. It's very clever. And it just doesn't stop from there. It just keeps going. And that's all down to the writing. And that's down to the fact that Cary Grant is a veteran at screwball comedies. So he can deliver lines quickly, but succinctly as well. So he's basically saying, right, we're off here. It's your job as an audience to keep up with us and actually understand what's going on. Yeah.
I think it's funny that you're saying that, actually, because I never even thought about that, because he was, I mean, Bringing Up Baby, one of my favourite films, and things like that, but it will have been that sort of comedy background that allowed him to sort of personify this character in a way that likes of James Stewart wouldn't have done. Now, James Stewart has done comedies, obviously, and he has done lighter sort of romantic dramas, but never in the way that I feel like Cary Grant's got a physicality in this role that sort of backs up the fact that he is making these kind of wisecracks and stuff like that. So do you know what I mean? Like, there's just something about probably maybe a bit training maybe that he's had, or just the types of films that he's done previously, that just makes him really embody this role in a way that I cannot see anyone else ever doing justice to.
Okay, so in a lot of ways, this is almost like the sort of prototype Hitchcock film. You have your title design by Saul Bass, you have Bernard Herrmann doing the music again. Now, interesting thing about the title design, it was the first feature film to use kinetic typography in its opening credits, as in things were moving about on the screen. It hadn't been done in that sort of scale before. And it was just really unusual. And that, I think, with all of Saul Bass's work with Hitchcock, it just adds to the film, because it gives you that introduction to the pacing more than anything else, because there's things moving about on the screen all over the place, all the titles and everything. And then you've got Herrmann's theme sitting underneath that. And again, it's kinetic, it's propulsive and everything. So do you think this is amongst the best music that has been there? It's probably some of the best known, but do you think, how do you think it worked? Do you think it worked in a good way?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that. I didn't realise that about the kinetic lettering. That, you know, this is a film that is full of movement, and in a way that this feels hectic, whereas The Man Who Knew Too Much feels messy. And I think that's the difference between it. That hectic is a good thing in this film, and I certainly think the score underlines that. You know, you get quite a sort of, as you say, propulsive sort of opening piece, but it's also the moments of silence that I think that are quite important as well. You know, you have that the gunshot where all the sort of canteen comes to a standstill, and there are moments where, you know, Eve Marie and Cary Grant are gazing lovingly into each other's eyes, or there's moments of tension that are, you know, sort of propagated by strings, which obviously is a big sort of favourite of Hitchcock. But I think this is a film that knows when to use music, because there's action, and it's important that we sort of bound along with it, and those sort of big sort of percussion-y pieces really work in that space. But then you've got moments of silence where you're going, you need to pay attention to this because something really bad is going to happen. And I think it really gets the balance right in that sense. But yeah, this is one of the more percussive scores, I think, as well. As I say, there is strings in there, but I think there's something quite bounding and bombastic about it that really fits the character and the pacing of the film in general.
Yeah, it's one of these scores, I think, that you can quite easily listen to without actually having seen the visuals, because you can create your own visuals about what you actually think is happening as well. I think it's a wonderful piece of music. It definitely is. You mentioned, obviously, the use of like noise and quiet and everything as well. Now, within this film and also the previous one we talked about, The Man Who Knew Too Much, there are scenes where there is dialogue going on, but the dialogue is actually masked by another sound. Now, in terms of North by Northwest, there's a scene where they are talking and all you can hear is airplane noise. So you can't actually hear what they're saying. And in The Man Who Knew Too Much, there's a scene in the restaurant where Louis is sitting with a woman and he's talking to her. And it's quite close up on them, but you cannot hear what they're saying because of the noise of the restaurant and the music in the restaurant and everything as well. And obviously well, for me, that goes back to sort of silent film techniques, the way of using that. Now, do you think that's one of his sort of signature moves, or is it something that's quite unusual in Hitchcock's body of work?
Do you know, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I can't think of that you've pointed that out. I can't think of things, but there will have been films, because there's this scene in Vertigo where she walks into the sort of florist and you can't hear what she's saying to the florist, and he's sort of peeping through that gap. So this actually is used quite a lot, and I've never really thought about that before, but you're right. And because because both of these in a way are sort of, well, The Man Who Knew Too Much is kind of a political thriller. North by Northwest is maybe what you'd call like a conspiracy thriller, I suppose.
Yeah.
But because you are desperate to find out information about, you know, these lead characters and where they're going to go next, all of these scenes where you can't hear anything are really frustrating, because you, in both cases, you are, you know, with James Stewart or Doris Day or with Cary Grant, trying to piece together just what the hell is going on. You know, who is it that they're going to assassinate, or who is it they're actually looking for? And so these moments cause frustration in the sense that you are trying to do the jigsaw puzzle at the same time as the lead character. But actually it works really well because you don't want to know more. I think it kind of ruins it sometimes when you know more than what the lead character knows. You want to be on this journey with them, sort of working it out and putting all the puzzle pieces together. So actually it does work in the sense that we are in the dark when they're in the dark, or we get the information, or as you say, that lovely little airplane sound, so we get the warning just as they're getting it as well. And it does work really well in both these cases because they are these kind of piece them together as you go type of thrillers.
Yeah, I think it works very well for the very reason you mentioned, in that it's frustrating because you want to know what's going on, what's actually happening on screen, and it makes you think. And it could be wrong what you're actually thinking in terms of the way that it's going to go, but it does make you think, which is quite rare sometimes, I think. And
it can be a red herring, which obviously Hitchcock loves as well. He loves to distract you over here and go, look at this conversation, what could be going on here? And actually you should be paying attention to something completely different. So it's just another little trick of his to get you to maybe look where you shouldn't be looking.
Yes, it certainly is. Another aspect of Hitchcock's work, and one that he actually coined himself, was the MacGuffin. Now, there is a MacGuffin here, but it's not really highlighted or really sort of introduced until quite late on. Do you think there was a reason for that, or is it just it wasn't necessary?
So this is the microfilm.
Yes, the microfilm.
Yes. So I don't necessarily think it adds anything to the film, but it also doesn't take anything away from, you know, you understand that these are bad guys, and they probably do have sort of like fingers in every pie, in the sense that they're not just trying to track down Kaplan. They'll be doing other things at the same time. So actually, I don't have an issue with that. They put it inside. Is it a brass monkey or something?
Yes, it's a statue. Yeah.
So even that I thought was quite kind of silly, because, you know, obviously it's this big heavy object and you're thinking, is somebody going to get clobbered with that? So it is one of these things where it makes sense to their characters, because you imagine that they are not just bad guys doing one bad thing, that they'll have lots of other different sort of plots that they're involved in. So I actually don't have an issue with it. It doesn't, as I say, it doesn't take anything away from the Roger Thornhill situation. It maybe just gives you a sort of slightly different flavour as to how bad the bad guys are, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for me, it kind of sort of cemented the fact that they were busy people.
Yes.
And it meant that there was like lots to them, but also sort of tied things up quite nicely, because it gave Roger a piece of evidence, if you like, that he was actually in the right here, because he was made out, at that point, he was like deep in the shit, because he'd been made out to be a murderer and all sorts, and he was being pursued by the authorities. So you would imagine that it would have been difficult to get out of that. Now, whereas if he can present this story and back up with evidence, it's a nice wee piece of evidence that you can have at the end as well, which works. And you're right, anything that's big and heavy can be used as a weapon. So it does featuring that as well, so it's all very good. Now, I think this sort of final question is a bit redundant in this case, but do you think you would recommend this movie?
Yes, absolutely. I just, as I said, it's one of my favourite films, never mind, you know, my favourite Hitchcock. Like, I can virtually quote word for word where he's like, what is it? I've got a job, a secretary, a mother, 2 ex-wives and several bartenders that are very dependent on me. Like, I love the characterization. I love the subterfuge. I love the glamour. I love the location shots. I love how ambitious it is in terms of the stunt work that it undertakes as well. And I just think there's lots of like lovely little touches of, you know, Cary Grant isms throughout it as well that just make it so irresistible. And so yes, absolutely. As I say, you will not be disappointed. It's going to fly in and you're going to marvel at, you know, this was made in 1959 before the word summer blockbuster even existed. And it's ticking all the boxes that it absolutely should. It's fantastic.
Nice. For me, yes, I would definitely recommend this film. I think it's almost a perfect film. It's just superb in every way. If someone came to me and said, I've never seen any Alfred Hitchcock films, where should I start? I think this would be the one that I would say, yep, here you go first, and then work out from there. Because you don't want to give them anything heavy. You wouldn't say Psycho for an opener.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you would, depending on the kind of people that you hang about with. But
if it was Simmy and Simmy said I've never seen a Hitchcock, I'd be like, Psycho, not only because it's scary, but because there's loads of sequels.
Absolutely. So yes, definitely yes, I would recommend this wholeheartedly. I think it is a masterpiece in every way, and it's one of these films that you can watch time and time again and never really get tired of it. It's that rare beast that works on so many different levels. So that is us for today. We have obviously covered 2 Hitchcock films. If you have any comments about what we've discussed today, anything you think we've missed, because there are so many things that you can talk about in terms of Hitchcock films, and I'm sure that I have missed at least one theme within this film, even though they denied that there was any themes at all in the film. That it was a straightforward film. Even the title was just a title of a film. It wasn't listed as, it didn't really have any significance in terms of the plot of the film either. So, but yes, if you do have any interesting information or anything you'd like to pull us up on, please do get in touch with us. We are on the social media channels of your choice at Moviescramble. You can send us an email at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk, and if you find us on the, maybe X is probably the easiest one, you'll see that we're all listed there individually as well. So yeah, please, get in touch with us. We do have at least another one, probably 2 or 3 Hitchcocks to do. They will be coming up in the weeks to follow. We like to intersperse them with some of the other reviews as well. And once completed this, we will be looking to do another marathon as well, but we'll talk about that nearer the time. Probably the start of next year, we'll be looking to do that as well. So that's very good. So from me, thank you very much for listening. It's always nice, and we shall see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.